Social media shapes people's intuitions about how the world is and about the way it works in ways that I think are sometimes not very responsive to evidence or to data or to challenges from a more neutralized, logical point of view. So I'd like to think through in this video the difference between the intuitive understanding of the world and what I'm going to call the vetted understanding of the world, where vetted is sort of the way we understand reality in a more logical way that's informed by education, that's informed by data, that's informed by careful thinking. The intuitive understanding of the world, it's not a bad thing, and I do think people's intuition can pick up on types of information that is not even accessible to the vetted vision of reality. But sometimes the intuitive vision of the world or the intuitive understanding of reality can be hijacked and taken over to make people more anxious, which I think social media is doing, or to embed prejudices, embed negative reactions to people that are not based in reality. So that's what this video is really about. It's me comparing these two types of knowledge that people have. And I would like to start with 3 different examples that are going to give us some material to work with. So the first is going to be the person who's afraid of flying on an airplane. A lot of times their intuition tells them they're really not safe. And that intuition may have been shaped by perhaps the first time they went on an airplane, there was major turbulence. And maybe that's sort of bolstered by some movies they've watched about airplanes losing control and everybody dying or whatever. So their intuition about flying is flawed because their intuition tells them this is a really dangerous thing to be doing. And you could present them with tons of evidence that all of these engineers say airplanes are totally safe, or the probability of dying on an airplane is way less than dying driving to your grandmother's house on the highway. You can show them all kinds of data about deaths on an airplane flight versus deaths in a car, and you can adjust that for all kinds of things. Like, you can show them all of this logical evidence. And yet, it's really hard for them to translate that logical evidence into their intuition, into the way they feel about the dangers of flying. So that's example number 1. Example number 2 is little kids who are afraid of dogs. And I like this example because it adds a little bit of nuance here. Like, there are some dogs that are kind of dangerous. But for adults who have lived with dogs all their life or have met a lot of dogs, they kind of know how to intuit which dogs are dangerous and which dogs aren't. Like, you're looking for the snarl, you're looking for the aggressive body posture in dogs. And if the dog is relaxed and you can tell it's relaxed and its tail is wagging, you know that that dog is probably safe. But for kids who are afraid of dogs, they haven't yet developed the intuition to really discern when a dog's approaching them, is this dog dangerous or not? And I like that example because the intuitive understanding of dogs involves knowledge that is really only available in your intuition. It's knowledge about the dog's body posture and about how to tell whether a dog's dangerous or safe that people develop through interacting with a lot of dogs. So in this case, the intuitive part of your understanding of the world is actually really essential. And it might be rational in some ways, like rational for kids to be afraid of dogs until they've developed that better intuition for telling whether this particular dog is dangerous or not. Now, my third example will be a social media example because, of course, that's what I'm interested in on this channel. And this is going to be an elderly person who is afraid of being afraid of violence against them while they're on the streets. And I think a lot of times social media really knows how to tap into people's fears and their insecurities. And because people are going to watch more content that helps them think more about their fears and insecurities, I think this is one of the mechanisms that's causing a rise in anxiety among people who use social media. So an older person is becoming more frail than they were in the past, and they start to fear that they could not stand up for themselves in the case where there was violence against them. So if they start to click on that kind of content that shows, oh, older adult got attacked while crossing the street, older adult got attacked while putting their groceries in their car, if that kind of content gets a click from them and gets them to spend more time on platform, they could be fed a lot of content like that. In fact, this kind of content, all of these anecdotes, could shape their intuition about how frequently people target older adults who are frail and vulnerable. And this could deeply influence how they feel going to the grocery store and walking down the street. If their intuitive perception of their likelihood of being attacked is way out of line with reality. Like maybe they live in a really safe place and that people don't attack older adults. That's just kind of a diabolical thing to do. So this is an example where the reality of crime statistics is the truth, and the intuition that comes from all of the examples you read about on social media shapes your intuitive understanding in a way that is false. And not only false, but perhaps harmful to the person who's afraid to go on a walk and afraid to go to the grocery store and who is feeling a lot more anxiety about their own vulnerability than they would be if they weren't on social media. Okay, so with those three examples, I'd like to go through this model that I'm coming up with in my head about the perception of reality in these two different realms. So let's start by thinking about the intuitive realm, or the intuitive understanding of reality. And I came up with this idea to think more about this after reading this book, How Emotions Are Made, which makes the case that our brains are constantly predicting what's going to happen next, and that our emotions are very much tied to those predictions. Like if your brain's predicting that this is a place you need to be really vigilant because there's a high chance you're going to be attacked, you're going to feel anxiety, you're going to feel fear. And if your brain tells you everything's fine, you can be relaxed here, you can take a nice walk down your neighborhood street, that's going to be a very different emotion than if your brain had predicted this is a dangerous place. So when I say our intuitive understanding of reality, that reality is the pool of information that the brain's predictive machine is pulling from when it predicts what your emotions should be. And of course, to predict your emotions, it's trying to predict how much energy should you be drawing from your body budget to handle the current situation. And so it's pulling from a pool of information that's based on your past experiences, your understanding of concepts that helps you to interpret the world around you. It's pulling from stories that you've heard from people, because I've made arguments in other videos that we experience stories emotionally in a way that shapes our intuition in the same way if we experience them personally. Or maybe not the exact same way. Maybe it's a little bit less emotion when we're hearing the story rather than experiencing it. But I'm making the argument that stories shape our intuition, they shape our reactive system in a way that's similar to personal experience. Now, I think information like book knowledge can also shape our intuitions, but our intuitions are mainly shaped where there is emotion that's sort of driving what do you need to pay attention to? Does your body need to be in fight or flight? So if you encounter a new piece of, say, information that's a statistic, how that generally gets translated into this intuitive understanding is usually by imagining it in a slightly emotional way. And once you've done that little thought experiment, then that piece of information gets translated from the vetted set of knowledge to the more intuitive set of knowledge that your predictive brain can use to manage your body budget. In other words, your emotions. Now, I'm a big fan of intuition generally, but intuition can be a source of certainly bias in terms of our emotions, and that includes our emotions when we meet new people. Like if we're thinking about this example of the older adult who's watched a whole bunch of videos of older adults being attacked when they're just out doing their business. If in most of those videos, the person attacking the older adult is wearing a hoodie, then the intuition is going to pick up on the idea that, oh, a person wearing a hoodie is a heightened threat for violence, and I need to be more scared, and my reactive system needs to be more engaged when I see a person in a hoodie, even if that's completely irrational. And even if the older adult doesn't even realize why they're sort of feeling anxious when someone wearing a hoodie is walking down the street next to them. So, there's a lot of biases and including biases that can really negatively impact emotion that are built into the intuitive understanding of the world. All right, now let's compare this to the vetted understanding of the world. And the first thing I want to convey is just because information about the world is vetted does not mean it's accurate. It just means that there's some process by which you decide if you believe something is true, and it's gone through that process. So a lot of this comes through people we trust. And this could be a teacher. It could be a pastor at your church. It could be the mailman or the neighbor or your older brother. Basically, if we decide a person is a valid source of information, even if they have their own biases and they don't fully vet every piece of information that comes through them, that's part of the vetting process. Is just if they say it's true, you build that into your worldview, you don't question it. And if you think about the ways we gain new information about, say, science, very little information is developed firsthand by you doing the experiment directly, if we're talking science. You generally just believe the textbook, believe the professor, believe your brother who's a scientist, and assume that whatever process got that information to them has been fully vetted. Now, of course, direct experience with the world is one source of vetted information. If you're like, my neighbor got a new dog, well, you met the new dog, it was with the neighbor, that's direct experience, and that goes into the vetted side of your worldview, in addition to the intuitive side of your worldview. So there's actually a lot of overlap between these two sides. It's just the vetted part of your worldview goes through some process that you have decided is valid for determining information. Now, one of the main purposes of education is going to be to improve your processes for vetting information so that you know how to check sources, you know how to think critically to figure out when should I be skeptical of a source and when does that source's information fit with everything else I've learned from valid sources. Basically giving you a whole bunch of techniques to do a better job of vetting new information that comes to you. That is the job of higher education. That's the job of K through 12 education. Having a population that's better at that is going to be super useful for the economy. Now, one difference between these two types of knowledge of the world is that the vetted type of knowledge can take in boring information. It can take in statistics, graphs, boring to read academic studies. It can take in information that has zero emotional value. And of course, if it really does have zero emotional value, it's not going to be translated into the intuitive part of your brain unless your brain does some extra work to try to translate that new piece of academic style information into something that's relevant to you emotionally. Like if you read something that's about, here's the best way to fall. Like I've seen studies that show older adults, if you're going to slip and fall on the pavement, in some ways you fall, you like hit the ground the wrong way and you're much more likely to break your bones. But you can look up information on how should you fall to reduce the chance that you'll break your hip or break your bones. So that's academic knowledge. But it has emotional relevance to you. So when you read it, you're kind of imagining, oh, what if someone bumped me and I fell over, and how would I handle myself? That imagining the situation where it would be relevant in your mind, that little thought experiment translates that knowledge from the vetted types of knowledge to the more intuitive types of knowledge that can actually inform your gut reactions. Okay, so why is this relevant for social media? And there's a couple of reasons. I think reason number one is that social media has an incentive to cause anxiety. Because if we're anxious about something, we're more likely to click on content that taps into that anxiety. It's the phenomenon of driving by an accident and watching that accident. It's that phenomenon. It draws our attention if we're anxious about that thing. And unfortunately, things that tap into our vulnerabilities and our insecurities are going to pull us in more than other types of content. And therefore, the online space is much more likely to develop deep intuitions about the probability and risk we face, that are personally connected to our vulnerabilities. So this is actually one of the reasons I think there is a rise in anxiety, is that people are consuming content that shapes their intuition falsely in a way that is not going to respond to academic knowledge and new data. It's going to just shape how they feel and their perception of risk. The second problem I think we have here has to do with people's perception of the other, or the group that they're afraid of, the group that they hate, and maybe even just the group that they feel morally superior to. A lot of what's going on online is people are getting these kind of bigoted, stereotyped views of other groups of people. And those views are going to influence how they treat people in that group, even if their probabilities or their intuitive perception about the probability that that person is dangerous, or that person is mean, or that person is destroying democracy or destroying their culture or whatever. If the probability of that is way out of proportion in their intuitive brain compared to reality, people are not going to treat each other well. And I think this is something we're observing more and more because of the way social media is acting on people's intuitive understanding rather than their vetted understanding. Now, the third reason I think this matters is if we want some real solutions to these problems of polarization and increased hatred, increased anxiety, then some of the ways people are looking at this is that we need better information. We need people to know what the statistics actually are. We need people to encounter more academic studies. And the thing is, that's not going to work unless there's a way of translating that information into the intuitive part of people's understanding. So I don't have a solution to this necessarily right in this moment, but I think this is how we need to start thinking about the distortions of reality that people get in the online space.